Welcome to Human Monsters. The following are from press releases issued by the FBI. Afghan national sentenced to serve 15 years in federal prison after plotting Election Day terror attack in the United States. Wednesday, November 19th, 2025. Abdullah Haji Zada, 19, a native and citizen of Afghanistan and U.S. lawful permanent resident, has been sentenced to serve the statutory maximum of 15 years in federal prison for knowingly receiving, attempting to receive, and conspiring to receive a firearm and ammunition to be used to commit a federal crime of terrorism. According to court documents, Zada and a co-conspirator received two AK-47 style rifles and 500 rounds of ammunition, knowing that the firearms and ammunition would be used in connection with a terrorist attack on Election Day in November 2024 on behalf of the Islamic State of Iraq and al-Sham, ISIS, a designated foreign terrorist organization. Zada was arrested with his co-conspirator Nasser Ahmad Tawadi, 28, also a citizen of Afghanistan, in October 2024. Zada was welcomed into the United States and provided with all the opportunities available to residents of our nation, yet he chose to embrace terrorism and plot an ISIS-inspired attack on Election Day, said John A. Eisenberg, Assistant Attorney General for National Security. Today's sentence and Zada's eventual removal from the United States reflect the seriousness of his betrayal and our commitment to using every tool at our disposal to detect and disrupt such plots. With today's sentencing, Zada will pay the price for participating in a plot last year to conduct an ISIS-inspired Election Day terrorist attack, said Assistant Director Donald Holstead of the FBI's Counterterrorism Division. Detecting and preventing acts of terrorism against the American people is an essential part of the FBI's mission. We will continue working closely with our law enforcement partners to protect our communities. The sentence today reflects the gravity of the planned terrorist attack, which was thwarted by the exceptional work of law enforcement, said United States Attorney Robert J. Troster for the Western District of Oklahoma. The Department of Justice remains vigilant and focused to detect, deter, and disrupt acts of terrorism and hold offenders accountable. By hatching a violent plot against the United States on behalf of ISIS, the defendant and his co-conspirator shamefully turned their backs on the country that provided them safety and refuge, said FBI Oklahoma City Special Agent in charge Doug Goodwater. I'm extremely proud of the swift and coordinated action taken by the Oklahoma City Joint Terrorism Task Force as soon as this disturbing plan was uncovered. The FBI and our law enforcement partners will never relent in our fight against terrorism and in protecting the American people from those who wish them harm. Zada, who was 17 at the time of his arrest, entered his guilty plea as an adult on April 17, 2025. As part of the plea agreement, Zada stipulated to the entry of a judicial order of removal from the United States to Afghanistan following his term of incarceration. Zada acknowledged that the order of removal would terminate his lawful permanent resident status. Zada also waived his right to appeal the conviction except in limited circumstances or seek any form of appeal or relief from his removal and deportation, including but not limited to seeking asylum. At a sentencing hearing today, U.S. District Judge Scott L. Polk sentenced Zada to serve 15 years in federal prison. Zada's co-conspirator, Tawhidi, pleaded guilty on June 13, 2025, to two terrorism-related offenses: conspiring and attempting to provide material support and resources to ISIS, a designated terrorist organization, and attempting to receive, and conspiring to receive firearms and ammunition in furtherance of a federal crime of terrorism. At sentencing, Tawhidi faces a maximum penalty of up to 20 years in prison for the material support charge and up to 15 years in prison for the firearms charge. A sentencing date has not yet been set. Upon completion of any sentence, Zada and Tawhidi will be permanently removed from the United States and barred from re-entry under stipulated judicial orders of removal to Afghanistan. Registered sex offender who cut off ankle bracelet and committed more sex crimes against children, sentenced to 17 years in prison. Preyed on children as young as 12 across the Pacific Northwest. Seattle, a 29-year-old registered sex offender who sexually exploited more than a dozen teens after cutting off his electronic monitoring device and absconding from Department of Corrections community custody, was sentenced today in U.S. District Court in Seattle to 17 years in prison, announced U.S. Attorney Charles Neal Floyd. Between February and April 2024, James Jake Harrison, newcomer, sexually abused teens he met via various social media platforms. At the sentencing hearing, U.S. District Judge John H. Chun said, "These are heartbreaking crimes." The youngest victim was just 12 years old. This repeat offender is every parent's nightmare. The dangerous stranger who enters your home via the internet and steals your child's innocence, said U.S. Attorney Floyd. Having been convicted in state court of rape of a child, he had a chance to get treatment and turn his life around. Instead, he cut off his ankle monitor and preyed upon more than a dozen children for his sexual gratification. At least now he will be off the street. According to records filed in the case, Newcomer was on state supervision following his 30-month prison sentence for 2 counts of rape of a child. As part of the supervision, Newcomer was on electronic monitoring with an ankle bracelet. On January 19, 2024, the ankle monitor lost connection, and when corrections officer went to arrest Newcomer on January 25, 2024, he had left the residence and could not be located. Over the next 3 months, Newcomer posed as a teenage boy and connected with various teen girls via social media, such as Discord and Snapchat. He then arranged to meet them in person. In those meetings, he gave girls drugs and alcohol and sexually assaulted them. The victims were from King Kitsap, Snohomish, Lewis, Clark, Thurston, and Spokane counties, as well as Woodburn, Oregon. The victims ranged in age from 12 to 16. In court today, prosecutors noted that Newcomer possessed multiple electronic devices that contained child sexual abuse material. Despite the best efforts of law enforcement, not all the children pictured in the images on the electronic devices have been identified. Family members of victims told the judge how Newcomer had profoundly damaged their children and the struggles they now have with healing and recovery. The crime, they said, impacted the entire family. He manipulated, drugged, and abused our child. One father told the court, Already a registered sex offender, Mr. Newcomer clearly didn't learn his lesson from his previous sentence, said W. Mike Harrington, special agent in charge of the FBI's Seattle field office. Right after removing his monitoring device and fleeing supervision, Mr. Newcomer quickly returned to exploiting children, luring and sexually assaulting multiple teen and preteen girls from across Washington and Oregon by impersonating a teen boy online. Thanks to the efforts of several federal, state, and local law enforcement agencies, young people in the Pacific Northwest will be safer with Mr. Newcomer behind bars. We hope this lengthy sentence serves as a warning of the severe consequences child predators can face for their crimes. Judge Chun ordered Newcomer to be on lifetime supervised release following the 17-year prison term. On August 8, 2025, Newcomer pleaded guilty to travel with intent to engage in sexual acts with a minor and 2 counts of attempted enticement of a minor. Travel with intent to engage in sexual acts is punishable by up to 30 years in prison. Enticement of a minor is punishable by a mandatory minimum 10 years in prison and up to life in prison. The case was investigated by the FBI, the Woodburn, Oregon Police Department, former Riverside School paraeducator, pleads guilty to 12 separate counts of child exploitation involving multiple minor victims. Monday, November 17th, 2025. Spokane, Washington. United States Attorney Pete Serrano announced on October 15th, 2025, that former Riverside School District employee Dallas Michael Schuler pled guilty to 12 felony counts pertaining to the online exploitation of children. As indicated in court pleadings and hearings, in May of 2024, the FBI Spokane office was contacted due to a child sexual abuse material video which had been posted online. When questioned about the video, Mr. Schuler indicated he had been in contact with the minors depicted in the video and had requested they produce the sexually explicit material. Further investigation into Mr. Schuler's electronic devices and online accounts showed Mr. Schuler had engaged in hands-on sexual abuse of at least 3 minor children and had filmed the abuse. He also engaged in online sexual exploitation of children with dozens of additional victims, many of whom were contacted and victimized through Snapchat. The charges pled to encompass sexual exploitation against 37 different minor children. United States Attorney S. Peter Serrano stated the following: abuse of any kind against a child is an egregious violation. My office is ready to aggressively prosecute those who exploit children in any way. Mr. Schuler's conduct was a shocking breach of trust, particularly considering his position in an elementary school. I commend those who acted quickly in investigating and prosecuting this case. No child should experience what the children in this case unfortunately went through. I stand with our law enforcement partners in working to end the exploitation of children. As a school district employee, Mr. Schuler was entrusted with the children of this community, whom he held a responsibility to safeguard and guide as a role model, said W. Mike Harrington, special agent in charge of the FBI Seattle field office. It was a horrifying betrayal of that trust to abuse his access to children by exploiting them both in person and online, including by filming graphic and explicit videos. Tragically, no prosecution can undo the harm these children suffered or fully erase its record from the internet. Still, our case team, partner law enforcement agencies, and prosecutors hope that this case can help prevent harm to other vulnerable children by sending a warning to would be predators that we will hold them accountable for their crimes. White Swan Man sentenced to 12 years in prison for attempted sexual abuse by force or threat on the Yakama Reservation. Monday, November 17th, 2025. Yakima, Washington, United States Attorney S. Peter Serrano announced that United States District Judge Mary K. Dimke sentenced Jerry Sloggish, 58, to 144 months in prison for attempted sexual abuse by force or threat in the Indian country. The child victim was 6 years old at the time of the offense. According to court documents and information presented at the sentencing on June 4th, 2019, the child victim's sixth birthday, Slockish waited until he was alone with the child and told her that he wanted to give her a birthday present. After the child refused, Slockish forcibly grabbed the child and started touching her. The child told Slockish to stop and began to scream. Slockish covered the child's mouth with his hand and touched the genitalia of the child over her clothing. After Slockish sexually assaulted the child, she attempted to leave the bedroom, but Slockish seized her and dragged her back into the bedroom. Slockish then told the child that he would give her, quote, whoopings and bruises on her eyes, face, and legs if she told anyone about the touching. Protecting children and our most vulnerable from sexual and physical abuse is a priority of this administration and my office, said United States Attorney Pete Serrano. Successful prosecution depends on strong collaboration and partnership with our tribal partners, law enforcement, social services, and child advocates. Together, we can hold these heinous offenders accountable. At sentencing, MMIP AUSA Bree Blackhorse noted Slockish's nearly 30-year history of perpetrating physical, emotional, and sexual violence against women and children, as reflected in police reports and Child Protection Services records. In recommending a 12-year sentence, MMIP AUSC Black Horse stated the sexual victimization of a child is among the most serious of criminal offenses because this type of crime inflicts immeasurable and lasting harm on the most vulnerable in our society. A 12-year sentence makes clear the justice system prioritizes the protection of vulnerable victims and assures the community that the justice system will respond with seriousness and proportionality to the sexual assault of a child. A child's birthday should be a day of joy and hope for the year ahead, said W. Mike Harrington, special agent in charge of the FBI Seattle field office. Instead, on her sixth birthday, this victim tragically suffered long-lasting harm from an adult who should have protected her. I hope this case serves as a reminder that, no matter how long it takes, the FBI is dedicated to seeking justice for our nation's most vulnerable citizens within tribal lands and beyond. Leader of white supremacist group pleads guilty to soliciting hate crimes and sending instructions to make bombs in ricin. Monday, November 17th, 2025. Leader of the maniac murder cult recruited others to bomb and poison the Jewish community and racial minorities. Earlier today, at the federal courthouse in Brooklyn, Georgian national Mikhail Chakivishvili, also known as Mishka, Michael, Commander Butcher, and Butcher, pleaded guilty to soliciting hate crimes and sending instructions to make bombs in ricin. Mishka was a leader of Maniac Murder Cult, an international racially motivated violent extremist group. Mishka recruited people to commit violent acts in furtherance of Maniac Murder Cult's ideologies, including planning and soliciting a mass casualty attack in New York City. In May 2025, Mishka was extradited from Moldova to the Eastern District of New York. The outstanding investigative work in this case saved untold lives and underscores the crucial behind the scenes activity of our federal law enforcement agents, said Attorney General Pamela Bondi. Violent, nihilistic, racist groups like these are an ongoing threat to the American people. Our vigilance will not waive as we protect our citizens. With today's guilty plea, this defendant admits to a horrific plot targeting Jewish people and racial minorities, and even planned to poison children with candy around the holidays, said FBI Director Kash Patel. The defendant was extradited from Moldova to face charges. This case shows once more that no matter where you are, if you try to harm our citizens, the FBI and our partners will find you and bring you to justice. Mishka's monstrous plots and propaganda, calling for racially motivated violence against civilians, including children, posed a grave threat to public safety, said Assistant Attorney General John A. Eisenberg. Unfortunately, his efforts on behalf of the aptly named Maniac Murder Cult, in fact, caused mayhem and death. We condemn his despicable ideology and will use every tool at our disposal to bring such predators to justice. The defendant has admitted his vile actions, including recruiting others to commit acts of violence against Jewish and racial minority children. His incitement of hate crimes resulted in real world violence, said U.S. Attorney Joseph Nocella Jr. This prosecution shows that our office will protect all communities from evildoers like the defendant from wherever they spew their hate. In June 2022, Mishka traveled to Brooklyn, New York. Beginning as early as July 2022, Mishka repeatedly encouraged others, primarily via the encrypted messaging application Telegram, to commit violent hate crimes and other acts of violence on behalf of Maniac Murder Cult. This included soliciting acts of mass violence in New York from an individual who, unbeknownst to Mishka, was an undercover FBI employee. Since approximately September 2021, Mishka has distributed a manifesto titled The Hater's Handbook to Maniac Murder Cult members and others. The Hater's Handbook encourages people to commit acts of mass violence. For example, the Hater's Handbook encourages its readers to commit school shootings. Beginning in approximately November 2023, Mishka solicited the UC to commit violent crimes such as bombings and arsons for the purpose of harming racial minorities, Jewish individuals, and others. In November 2023, Mishka began planning a mass casualty attack in New York City to take place on New Year's Eve. The scheme involved having an individual dress up as Santa Claus and hand out candy laced with poison to racial minorities. In January, the scheme evolved, and Mishka specifically directed the UC to target the Jewish community, Jewish schools, and Jewish children in Brooklyn with poison. Mishka sent detailed manuals about creating and mixing lethal poisons and gases, including ricin. Mishka's encouragement of violence have resulted in multiple attacks and killings around the world. In January 2025, a 17-year-old student killed one individual and injured another before dying by suicide inside Antioch High School in Nashville, Tennessee. The attacker live streamed part of the attack. Prior to the attack, in an audio recording posted online and attributed to him. The attacker claimed he was taking action on behalf of Maniac Murder Cult and at least one other group. The attacker's manifesto explicitly mentioned Mishka. In August 2024, an individual live streamed himself stabbing approximately 5 people outside of a mosque in Eskişehir, Turkey, wearing a tactical vest bearing a Nazi symbol. A manifesto attributed to the attacker included explicit references to Mishka and to violent statements made by him. Before the attack, the attacker also distributed a link to the Hater's Handbook authored by Mishka and other violent propaganda. Mishka faces a maximum sentence of 40 years in prison. Lafayette Parish couple involved in distributing child pornography, each sentenced to a decade or more in prison. Monday, November 17th, 2025. Lafayette, Louisiana. United States Attorney Zachary A. Keller announces that Brad William Blanchard, 45, has been sentenced for attempted receipt and attempted distribution of child pornography. United States District Judge David C. Joseph sentenced Blanchard to 150 months in prison, followed by 20 years or supervised release for these offenses. According to information presented in court, law enforcement agents involved in an undercover investigation began communicating with an individual later identified as Blanchard on an internet-based fetish forum wherein Blanchard expressed his sexual interest in underage children. Blanchard sent an undercover agent images of child sexual abuse material, which depicted a minor victim. Following this exchange, agents were able to obtain and execute search and arrest warrants for Blanchard's person, residence, and electronic devices. At the time the warrants were executed, Blanchard admitted to law enforcement that he had sent the images and that his girlfriend, Amy Kraft, had assisted in sending him for the images for his sexual gratification. Had assisted in sending him the images for his sexual gratification. Kraft was subsequently arrested and admitted her involvement in sending the images to Blanchard to fulfill his sexual fantasies and gratification. Amy Kraft, 49, the co-defendant and girlfriend of Blanchard, pled guilty to attempted distribution of child pornography and was sentenced on October 1st, 2025 to 120 months in prison, followed by 10 years of supervised release, and was ordered to pay $12,000 in restitution to the victims. Newcomb man charged with sexual assault of a minor. Friday, November 14th, 2025, Albuquerque. A Newcomb man has been charged in federal court with sexually assaulting a minor. According to court documents, between July and August 2025, Raymond LePahy, 18, an enrolled member of the Navajo Nation, allegedly engaged in multiple sexual acts with a minor. LePahy is charged with 2 counts of aggravated sexual abuse by use of force and 1 count of abusive sexual contact. He will remain in custody pending trial, which has not yet been scheduled. If convicted of all charges, LePahy faces up to life in prison, a minimum of 5 years of supervised release upon release from prison, and mandatory sex offender registration. District man sentenced to 25 years for producing child pornography and sexually abusing a young girl. Thursday, November 13th, 2025. Washington. Charles Hilton, 40, of the District of Columbia, was sentenced October 24th, 2025, in U.S. District Court to 25 years in federal prison in connection with producing child pornography and sexually abusing a young girl, announced U.S. Attorney Janine Ferris-Pirro. Hilton pleaded guilty March 27th, 2025, before Judge Anna C. Reyes to a criminal information charging him with one count of coercion and enticement of a child and one count of first-degree sexual abuse of a child with aggravating circumstances. In addition to the prison term, Judge Reyes ordered Hilton to serve 15 years of supervised release and to register as a sex offender. Joining in the announcement of the sentencing was FBI Assistant Director in Charge Darren B. Cox of the Washington Field Office and Chief Pamela A. Smith of the Metropolitan Police Department. Shaktoolik man sentenced to 30 years for cyberstalking, sexually exploiting multiple victims. Thursday, November 13th, 2025. Fairbanks, Alaska. A Shaktoolik man was sentenced last week to 30 years in prison, followed by 30 years on supervised release for sexually exploiting 3 children to produce child pornography and for cyberstalking the children and 1 adult victim. According to court documents, between December 2021 and July 2023, Matthew Jackson, 23, engaged in a pattern of sexual abuse and exploitation with multiple female victims, 3 of whom were minors. Jackson used a cell phone to send messages to the 3 minor victims, asking them to create pictures and videos depicting sexually explicit conduct. Jackson used the threat of disclosing those images to coerce sexual contact with the minors. Jackson filmed the sexual encounters without consent and provided marijuana and alcohol in exchange for sex. During the same period, Jackson employed the same or similar conduct with an adult victim. Jackson requested sexually explicit images, then engaged in a course of harassing conduct with the adult victim by threatening to disclose the images. Jackson stated he could make money from the images and threatened to sell them if the adult victim refused Jackson's demand for sexual intercourse. Jackson successfully coerced the adult victim to engage in sexual intercourse without consent and laughed while his victim expressed suicidal ideation. Arguments in court explain that Jackson used similar conduct to affect at least 3 additional adults. Jackson has a history of violent assaults and engaged in despicable conduct against multiple vulnerable victims, said U.S. Attorney Michael J. Heyman. His life of terrorizing Alaskans stops now. Thanks to the incredible strength of the victims and efforts by law enforcement, Jackson will spend the next 3 decades in prison, followed by decades under court supervision. Through manipulation and coercion, Jackson callously terrorized and sexually exploited both minors and adults in Alaska, said Acting Special Agent in Charge Brandon Waddle of the FBI Anchorage Field Office. Let this serve as a message to anyone who commits crimes against children in Alaska. The FBI and our partners will relentlessly pursue and hold predators accountable to the fullest extent of the law. Shiprock woman sentenced for child abuse. Thursday, November 13th, 2025. Albuquerque. A Shiprock woman was sentenced to 5 years of probation after failing to seek medical care for her injured son. There is no parole in the federal system. According to court documents, on March 15th, 2024, Avondale Johnson, 32, an enrolled member of the Navajo Nation, was arrested after Navajo Nation police responded to a concerned citizen's report that Johnson's minor son was living in a disabled car without heating or cooling and was left unattended for hours at a time. When officers arrived, they found the minor in the car wearing a soiled diaper and complaining of arm pain. Medical examination revealed the minor had a displaced spiral fracture in his upper arm that was approximately 1 week old. Johnson admitted she knew her son was injured but did not seek medical care. Johnson pled guilty to recklessly permitting the abandonment or abuse of a child with no death or great bodily harm. Tennessee woman pleads guilty to charges related to creation and distribution of videos depicting monkey torture and mutilation. Thursday, November 13th, 2025. A Tennessee woman pleaded guilty last week to crimes based on her involvement with online groups dedicated to creating and distributing videos depicting acts of extreme violence and sexual abuse against monkeys. Katrina Favorite of Greenville, Tennessee, pleaded guilty to conspiring to create and distribute so-called Animal Crush videos, and to a second count addressing a specific video she solicited. According to court documents, Favorite conspired with others to create and distribute videos depicting acts of sadistic violence against baby and adult monkeys. The conspirators used encrypted chat applications to direct money to individuals in Indonesia willing to commit the requested acts of torture on camera. According to a statement of facts signed by Favorite, the videos included depictions of monkeys having their digits and limbs severed, and monkeys being forcibly sodomized with a heated screwdriver. Texas man pleads guilty to sexual exploitation of a minor. Thursday, November 13th, 2025. Nashville. Philip Taylor Sobosh, 35, of Austin, Texas, has pled guilty to one charge of sexual exploitation of a minor, while also admitting to sexually exploiting 6 other minors. Protecting children from sexual predators is among the highest priorities of our office in the Department of Justice, said Acting United States Attorney Robert E. McGuire. Holding Sobosh accountable for all of his offenses against all his victims is vitally important to the safety of children in our community and across the country. According to court documents, between October 2018 and May 2019, Sobosh, then a practicing physician, engaged in an online sexually explicit relationship with minor victim 1 who resided in the Middle District of Tennessee. This online relationship began after they connected on a dating website that facilitates, quote, sugar daddy relationships. After their communications moved to text message, minor victim 1 informed Sobosh that she was 17 years old and sent him a photo of her driver's license, which confirmed her age. Sobosh requested that minor victim 1 produce and send him sexually explicit images of herself and provided her thousands of dollars in cash and gifts and to entice her to do so. Over the course of more than 7 months, minor victim 1 sent hundreds of sexually explicit photos and videos to Sobosh, most of which constituted child sexual abuse material. In addition to sexually exploiting minor victim 1, Sobosh admitted to sexually exploiting 6 other minors, aged 16 to 17, between 2017 and 2020. At Sobosh's direction, minor victims 2 through 7 created child sexual abuse material and sent it to Sobosh. Sobosh distributed child sexual abuse material depicting minor victims 1, 3, 4, 5, and 6, resulting in those victims' images being sold online under their names. Sobosh faces a mandatory minimum sentence of 15 years of imprisonment and a maximum sentence of 30 years of imprisonment and a fine of up to $250,000 when he is sentenced. He is also subject to forfeiture of property as alleged in the indictment. Imprisoned sex offender sentenced to 16 more months for threatening vengeance on minor victim's mother. Thursday, November 13th, 2025, Washington. Franklin Giovanni Torres, 42, a convicted sex offender serving time in federal prison, was sentenced November 5th to an additional 16 months for vowing revenge and mailing death threats to the mother of a teenage boy who he had sexually abused, announced U.S. Attorney Janine Ferris-Piro. Torres pleaded guilty August 27th before U.S. District Judge Colleen Kohler-Cotelli to one count of mailing threatening communications. The 16 months will be served consecutively to the earlier imposed 21-year prison term. Torres will be deported to El Salvador at the completion of his sentences. According to the plea agreement, on March 11th, 2015, following a jury trial, Torres was convicted in the district of producing child pornography, distributing child pornography, possessing child pornography, and first-degree sexual abuse of a minor. For those crimes, he was sentenced to 252 months in prison. On July 2nd, 2015, Torres mailed a handwritten letter from a federal corrections institute in South Carolina to the Northwest Washington, D.C. home of the minor victim's mother. The letter, written in Spanish, threatened, "I'm going to get out one day, and when that day comes is when you are going to shed tears of blood, because that day I'm going to get rid of your whole family. Cousins, nephews, and nieces, grandmother, children, even the dog at your home, I'll get rid of." The boy victim's parents had allowed Torres to stay in their apartment after Torres lost his job and needed a place to stay. After Torres had lived with the family for several months, the victim's mother discovered a naked photo of a male child with his face obscured on the defendant's Facebook page. The boy in the photo turned out to be the victim. The photo was taken by Torres during an incident in which Torres had sexually abused the boy. The mother and her son reported the sexual abuse to the police several months later after Torres moved out of their apartment. Man sentenced to 210 months for production of child pornography. Monday, September 29th, 2025. Mobile, Alabama. A mobile man was sentenced today to 210 months in prison for production of child pornography and attempted enticement of a child. According to court documents, throughout 2024, Jason Jones, 46, would pose as an attractive teenage boy on various online applications, such as Snapchat, and manipulate young girls to produce and send pornographic images to him. Jones communicated with two minor victims, ages 11 and 13. Jones also distributed items of child pornography and obscene material through internet-based applications to underage girls to entice them to engage in sexually explicit conduct. After a search warrant, child pornography was found on 3 of Jones's devices. Jones will be placed on a 15-year term of supervised release after incarceration and is prohibited from possessing internet-capable devices. He is also ordered to have no contact with minors. Jones will be required to register as a sex offender. Member of violent extremist network 764, charged with animal crushing, sexual exploitation of a minor, cyberstalking, and interstate threats. Monday, October 27, 2025. A federal grand jury in the Eastern District of California has returned a 6-count indictment against Tony Christopher Long, also known as Inactive, Inactive V0, and Inactive VX 19 of Porterville, California, charging him with animal crushing, 2 counts, sexual exploitation of a minor, possession of material involving the sexual exploitation of a minor, cyberstalking, and transmitting an interstate threat. Long is currently in state custody on related charges. This defendant allegedly engaged in acts of extreme cruelty by exploiting a child, abusing animals, and threatening violence. His conduct reflects the depravity of 764, said Attorney General Pamela Bondi. These networks seek to terrorize and destabilize our communities by preying on the most vulnerable, and the Justice Department will stop at nothing to dismantle this network and bring offenders to justice. The FBI has no tolerance for anyone who preys on children or other vulnerable members of our society, said FBI Director Kash Patel. This defendant allegedly targeted juveniles, took part in animal crushing, and was part of a violent online network which seeks to sow chaos and destabilize our society. The FBI will work with our law enforcement partners to investigate and hold accountable anyone who engages in such reprehensible and illegal activity. This indictment charges a constellation of offenses related to the troubling emergence of NVEs like 764 and related groups, said U.S. Attorney Eric Grant for the Eastern District of California. My office will vigorously investigate and prosecute offenses committed by NVE groups, including those alleged to have been committed by Long against young and vulnerable victims, he added. According to court documents, Long was a member and associate of 764, a criminal organization of nihilistic violent extremists. NVEs are individuals who engage in criminal conduct within the United States and abroad in furtherance of political, social, or religious goals that derive primarily from a hatred of society and a desire to bring about its collapse via chaos, destruction, and social instability. NVEs work individually or as part of a network with the goal of destroying civilized society through the corruption and exploitation of vulnerable populations, which often includes minors. The indictment returned by the grand jury on October 23rd alleges that in late 2024, Long purposely engaged in animal crushing, sexually exploited a juvenile victim living in Washington state, and committed cyberstalking and made online threats against a juvenile victim living in Kern County, California. If convicted, Long faces a maximum penalty of 7 years in prison on each of the 2 counts, charging animal crushing, a minimum mandatory penalty of 15 years in prison, up to a maximum of 30 years in prison for sexual exploitation of a minor, a maximum penalty of 10 years in prison for possession of material involving the sexual exploitation of a minor, a maximum penalty of 20 years in prison for cyberstalking, and a maximum statutory penalty of 2 years in prison for making an interstate threat. Each count of the indictment also carries a fine of up to $250,000. A federal district court judge will determine any sentence after considering the U.S. sentencing guidelines and other statutory factors. Pine Hall man charged with sexually abusing minors. Thursday, November 20th, 2025. Albuquerque. A Pine Hill man has been indicted on federal charges for sexually abusing 2 minors over a 7-year period. According to court documents, Between February 2017 and February 2023, TJ James, 41, an enrolled member of the Navajo Nation, engaged in sexual acts with two minor victims. James is charged with 4 counts of sexual abuse, 1 count of abusive sexual contact, and 2 counts of aggravated sexual abuse, and will remain in custody pending trial, which has not yet been scheduled. If convicted, James faces no less than 30 years and up to life in prison. Acting U.S. Attorney Ryan Ellison and Justin A. Garris, Special Agent in charge of the Federal Bureau of Investigation's Albuquerque Field Office, made the announcement today. Thank you for listening to Human Monsters. Bye for now.